Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be delving deep inside of myself for today's video. This is something that I have talked about previously here on my channel, but only briefly. I've never spoken about this in great detail, and honestly I'm kind of nervous to make this video, so please just be kind to me. A few years ago, I sat in front of my camera and talked about an interesting yet probably very weird mindset that I got into after my parents split up in 2011. That weird mindset was about video games, specifically one in particular, Dishonored. So today I'll be talking about why I believe I got into this mindset and how reality and the virtual world became very blurred and mixed. I'll also be talking about how the franchise saved my life and how it allowed me to somehow make sense out of a situation that was confusing to me. Please note that of course this was my personal experience and we all handle things differently. Video games just happened to be the route that I went down for escapism and solace in a very dark time of my life. So let's begin with the basics. From a very young age, around 2-year-old, I was introduced to the world of video games by my father, who I looked up to massively. During the day, he was the one to look after me. Not all the time, but quite a lot of the time, mainly because my mother worked throughout the day, whereas my dad worked through the night when I was young, and so they would alternate between going to work and then looking after me when they weren't at work. So during the day, my dad would often look after me, and because he was passionate about gaming, often that's what we ended up doing together. It was with no doubt a massive part of my life and still is to this day. Naturally, as I developed into a young adult, I continued to play video games. My parents split up in December of 2011. Well, I guess if you wanted to be a little bit more specific, it was early December because that was when my dad officially had left the family home. And even as I had grown older, I was 14 at the time of the splitting up, me and my dad were very, very close, which is, I guess, a tiny bit unusual because normally as daughters grow into young teens, they begin to lean more towards their mother for support, especially when they're going through puberty, for example. But that never really happened with me and my dad. Me and my dad had always been very close, and we remained close as I had gotten older. So he did promise that I would always be a part of his life, and unfortunately that's not how things turned out. When they split up, I did see a totally different side to my dad, and it was a side that I wasn't sure if I liked, and that was a very hard pill for me to swallow. I just couldn't recognize him, and the separation that happened between my mother and my father, it wasn't a smooth one. It was rough, hard, it was pretty horrendous in all fairness. Without going into too much detail, it just definitely wasn't a nice experience. Not only were my parents arguing, it made me and my dad argue as well. And the thing is, me and my father never ever argued. And I think the biggest reason why we didn't usually argue was because we were very similar people. We had similar personalities and we kind of just understood each other. So anyway, he left in December 2011 and things had changed completely from there on. Now, for those who don't know, Dishonored is a franchise that currently consists of numerous installments. To begin, you have the first game, simply entitled Dishonored, which was released back in 2012. And then they released the following year a few DLCs or downloadable content, one being called the Dunwall City Trials, the second called the Knife of Dunwall, and the third being called the Brigmore Witches. In 2016, the second main installment for the franchise was released, Dishonored 2, which was closely followed by what is currently the latest release of the franchise, Dishonored: Death of the Outsider. Between the first Dishonored's release in 2012 and December 2011, I had kind of distanced myself a little bit from the gaming scene. However, in early 2012, I decided to go to a gaming convention over in London, which was where I very first saw anything to do with the Dishonored franchise. It was a poster advertising the game prior to its release, and I was for some unknown reason drawn automatically to the poster the second I saw it, and I had no idea of the Dishonored franchise. I'd never heard of it prior to this. All I really remember was seeing that poster and not only being automatically drawn to the game, but desperately feeling the need to play it for some unknown reason. And it was such an odd moment in my life, but it was a very important moment in my life. For Christmas in 2012, I received the game as a gift, and I saw life almost in a whole new way. It began not only a new and unique look on my life, but also started the love and curiosity that I have for understanding how our brains work, our behavioural patterns, and why we do what we do. This, I suppose, for many is where it gets a little or a lot weird, because I spent an unhealthy amount of time on that game. On repeat too. I didn't just play it once and move on, I played it over and over, and it was the only game that I would ever play at that time of my life. I played it until I knew every little detail in game, from, for example, enemy pathways and routes to the script and more. I had slowly begun, strangely enough, to see correlations between my life and what was going on within it and the video game itself. I was linking characters from the game to people in my real life. For example, and I guess this part of the video is only going to really make sense if you have played the game or you know quite a bit about it, but I saw myself as Emily Caldwin. I saw my father as Dowd, my mother was Jessamine Caldwin, and the person my father cheated on my mum with was Delilah Copperspoon. The reason for those character choices, well, I was Emily because I often knew more than what I was letting on. That was something I picked up about Emily's character straight away within the game. Not only that, but she's brave, smart, and she isn't really a one to mess with, despite only being a very young child within the first installment. I wanted to be all of those things. I wanted to be a brave, strong woman, and no matter what, I'd be able to stand up against injustice or inequality and things like that. Now, my father was an interesting person to place, as to begin with, I saw him as Corvo, which is Emily's dad in the video game, but as time went by, I deemed him to be much more fitting as Dowd. Within the game, Dowd is the enemy. He murders Jessamine Caldwin, Emily's mother, and kidnaps Emily, framing Corvo for the crime, but he is much more than an enemy. Especially in The Knife of Dunwall and The Brigmore Witches, we see a different and new side to Dowd's character, and we delve deeper into his personality, which is great. We see that although Dowd is a man that has many wrongdoings and has made plenty of mistakes, he is a man with a heart and regret, especially about murdering Jessamine Caldwin. Throughout The Knife of Dunwall and The Brigmore Witches, we see Dowd secretly trying to make things right after murdering Jessamine until his bad choices come back to haunt him at the end of the installments. One of Dowd's most well-known quotes within the games is, "We make our choices and take what comes, and sooner or later, in ways we can't always fathom, the consequences come back to us." And that's a quote that I love so much, and that it has impacted me so much that I have it tattooed on my arm. But moving on, my mother, I always saw as Jessamine because she suffered a cruel twist in fate. She'd been betrayed. Finally, I placed the person my father ruined our family with as Delilah Copperspoon, simply because she's an enemy. You see her prominently in The Knife of Dunwall and The Brigmore Witches, and then again in Dishonored 2, and she and Emily really despise each other because Delilah took everything away from Emily. I could go into a much deeper discussion, but I think we need to move on. Previously to me even playing any game from the franchise, the marketing taglines were appealing to me. The first game was paired with the tagline, "Revenge solves everything," and the second main installment's tagline was, "Take back what's yours." Looking back, it was almost as if I was trying to control my father, almost saying that this isn't right, come back to us. And for a very long time, I think that I thought he was going to come back to us and everything would be okay and be normal again, but obviously not. It was his time to move on, but I wasn't ready to move on with him. Things had changed, and I simply couldn't keep up. It wasn't just the characters and taglines that I found to be relatable when it came to the franchise. It was the world around the characters too. Prior to Jessamine Caldwin's murder, we as players get a short and quick glimpse into a seemingly perfect and happy world. But it is a world that is filled with dread at the possibility of the rat plague becoming an issue within the city of Dunwall. Then the second Jessamine is murdered, we see a shift in the environment and atmosphere. The plague arrives and takes over the city, demolishing it to ruin. I saw the city of Dunwall as almost an accurate reflection of my world at the time. A world which was perfect and happy prior to my parents splitting up, and then destroyed and turned upside down and ruined after they split. I really did see it as the end of the world. I found a connection between my life and the franchise in any way that I could, which at the time I saw nothing wrong with, but looking back now I see that I was vulnerable and my mind had become completely warped. I was completely obsessed with the franchise with no doubt in my mind, as it was not only my escapism but also my way of trying to understand my situation. I was desperate for answers to questions that needed to be answered to enable me to move on, and at the time this was the only thing that I could do to try to understand things. It is an interesting way of trying to understand certain situations, and I'm not too sure how or why this happened the way that it did. The mind is a complex machine, and it's clear to me that when your mind is faced with blanks within a story or situation, it works hard to try to fill in those blanks. Sometimes we don't know why we do things. As weird as it sounds, without the franchise I wouldn't know where I would be right now. I certainly don't think that I would actually be here making videos or living my life, that's for sure. It's odd how I developed a relationship with the franchise, but it helped me in one of my most darkest times of my life. No one else would give me any answers, the answers that I needed. But somehow this franchise kind of did. And it didn't just help me understand things, but to some extent, it helped me understand myself, my own feelings at the time. It still does help me to this day. At times when I'm feeling low, I will turn to Dishonored still as an escapism. Is it healthy? Maybe not. But did it do me some good? Of course it did. And does it continue to do me some good? Personally, I think it does. So now I guess it's time that I should bring this video to an end. If you enjoyed this video, you found it interesting in some way, then leave it a thumbs up. If you're new here, make sure to click on that subscribe button. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, it means a lot. I did really have to open up with this video and I wasn't really comfortable throughout the whole thing, but in a way I'm kind of glad that I have finally gotten some of this stuff off of my chest. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in my next video.